Hi class, and welcome to your next video lecture on cladistics. Now cladistics is a branch of evolution, and we use this a lot of times to look at how closely things are related. But cladistics has some sub-branches, so we're actually going to be talking about the sub-branches and not cladistics as a whole today. So the first sub-branch is phylogeny. And phylogeny is the evolutionary history of a species or group of species. So basically, we're just following a species through its lineage. So hypotheses about phylogenetic relationships can be developed from various lines of evidence. So we look at many types of evidence, and we've looked at these in our study of evolution. Number one, the fossil record provides information about the timing of evolutionary divergences. So an evolutionary divergence is when certain species branch off on their own. And remember in class we talked about the fossil record and how things closer to the surface are actually older. And we're using that fossil record now to get this information in order to be able to look at the phylogenetic relationships within a species and a lineage. Number two, homologous morphological traits, behaviors, and molecular sequences also provide evidence of common ancestry. So we're going to look at these homologous morphological traits and behaviors. We can also look at molecular sequences such as the DNA, and we can actually see using our DNA that our DNA is 50% the same or homologous to the DNA of a yeast cell. So that meaning everything has evolved together, and there are homologies within many lineages. Okay, phylogeny and the tree of life. So we talked about analogous structures in class and what those analogous structures are. I'm just going to remind you a little bit about analogous structures, and we're going to talk about that. So analogous structures result from the convergent evolution in similar environments. Now, remember, an analogous structure is a structure that has the exact same function, but it's come from a different ancestor. And the reason it has the same function is the environments are very similar. So you might be asking yourself, well, Ms. Farwick, what is convergent evolution? Well, convergent evolution is how different lineages evolve to have similar characteristics. So just because it's in two different environments and we have the exact same function does not mean that it evolved in the same place. It just has to be a similar environment. And these similarities do not provide information about evolutionary relationships. We remember at homologous structures to look at our evolutionary relationships, but not these analogous. So here's an example of an analogous structure. This burrowing mole. We have a North American and an Australian burrowing mole, and look at them. They look like they have very, very similar structures, and they actually do. The tail here, the claws on both of them are very, very similar. However, they are not related. They evolved in a similar environment and they have similar functions, but their lineages do not cross. So let's talk a little bit about systematics. Systematics classifies organisms and determines their evolutionary relationship. Now remember that when we are classifying an organism, we are going through taxonomy, the branch that classifies all organisms into their different taxons, and we're going to talk about that a little later. So taxonomist, not taxidermist. A taxidermist is the people who stuff organisms after they have died. A taxonomist is the person who actually gives it its actual name and assigns each species name. So these taxonomists assign each species a binomial, which is our name, and it consists of their genus and their species. Now remember that Carolus Linnaeus is responsible for our current taxonomic system, thus we call it the Linnaean system. Now, all names are written in Latin in this system, and we've continued on with this. Genera are grouped into progressively larger categories. So we start out with that binomial, that genus and species, but we can go up in our larger categories. And remember, each taxonomic unit is called a taxon. So this actually says kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, but it should say domain, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. About 5 years ago, we added the new taxon domain, where we look at whether or not you're eukaryotic, you're prokaryotic, and if you're prokaryotic, there are actually 2 separate domains for that. We'll go into that a little later. Now, so we just talked about those taxons, and I want you to understand that as we start out with a taxon, we go smaller and smaller as we go down the line, or bigger and bigger as we go up the line. So we're looking at a dog here, and a dog can be related to so many things. If we're just talking about our domain can have plants, insects, fish, rabbits, all kinds of things. But if we go all the way down to order, which is Canidae, we can have fox, jackals, wolves, and dogs. So as we go down the line, we get more specific to the traits that this organism has, and that is why only some things can fit into these smaller taxons. Okay, so I wanted to give you something that you could relate to yourself. Here is the taxonomic units or taxons for a human, and as we know, we are in the domain Eukarya. We do have eukaryotic cells, and we are in the kingdom Animalia. We are considered a animal. Now, this is different than a plant or a fungus because they obviously are in the kingdom Plantae or fungi. We are in the phylum Chordata, which means we have a backbone. We're in the class Mammalia, which means we have hair, we produce milk, and we give birth to live young. We're in the order Primates, which means we have binocular vision. We use 2 eyes, and it produces 1 picture in our brains. And the family Hominidae, being of all the family of higher apes. So this is the same as humans, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, gibbons, and some other monkeys are in this as well. And we are just a family of higher apes. Now, if we go down even further, Homininae, not hominidae, Hominidae is a primate separate from the remainder of the family of apes. So we fall into this Homininae. And then we have our genus. It just means we're in the human line. So we now are Homo sapien, we have had Homo erectus, we have had all kinds of different Homo something based on when this human was around. So right now, modern humans are called Homo sapien based on their genus and species. So systematics is going to combine both classification and phylogeny. Okay, so we have shared characteristics that are used to construct a phylogenetic tree. A phylogenetic tree is a hypothesis of evolutionary relationships within a group. So what that means, it means that it is not the gospel truth. It is a hypothesis, which remember is an educated guess based on evidence that we have found. Cladistics uses shared derived characters to group organisms into clades, including an ancestral species and all its descendants. So we're just looking at that same lineage over and over, and we're seeing these different characters and characteristics. And shared ancestral characters were present in all of our ancestral traits and our ancestors in our lineage. So an important step in cladistics is the comparison of the in-group and the out-group. The in-group being the taxa who is being investigated, and the out-group being the one that diverged from before the lineage, leading to the members of the in-group. So generally we look at traits when we look at this with cladistics, and the out-group is going to be the one who has maybe only 1 or 2 of the traits or none of the traits. So the tree is constructed from a series of branch points, which are represented by the emergence of a lineage with a new set of derived traits. The simplest and most parsimonious, now parsimonious just means simple. It's a fancy term for the word simple, are generally the most correct. So if you see a very, very complex phylogenetic tree, there is a high chance that it might not be correct. So this is how we look at it. Across the top, you have your traits, and across the bottom, or the side, you have your organism. And you get a 1 if you actually have it, you get a 0 if you don't. And as we can see, this lamprey at the top is going to be our outgroup, and everything else in here is going to be our in-group. We carry some of those traits. Now we're looking at the lamprey, and the lamprey has none of these characteristics. So then we introduce the jaws, the lungs, the amniotic membrane, hair, no tail, and bipedalism. And we eventually see from a lamprey, we can get all the way to a human. Okay, well, this is your lecture for today. Make sure you took great notes, and make sure you copied down all of the figures. See you in class.